Copy that too, huh?
Yeah.
So we're
try to email it out to everybody.
Right.
we're just going to have a conversation.
Sounds good.
And this is about your personal story and
Sure.
how you choose to tell it. So
Okay.
there's I mentioned to you when we talked the other day what
Right.
kind of the arc of these interviews is, but it's everyone is different,
Sure.
and we can go on tangents. And I have some very general leading questions, but they're designed to allow you to speak about your
go in
experience
different
the way you
directions.
want to.
Okay.
And of course, we would love to talk to you about your current job, your current
Yeah.
position, but that's not the primary focus,
Okay.
unless you want to make it the primary focus.
Okay.
It's up to you.
Okay.
If I doubt if it'll happen, but if the conversation goes in an area where you say, I don't really want to talk about that, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll try to make this as easy and comfortable as possible.
Okay.
And I may ask a question
Sure.
if I see fit, but just answer to David as if he asked it. And
Okay.
I'll be asking it, but
Okay.
it'll be a good flow. I'm not
Sounds
gonna
good.
sideswipe the conversation or anything like that. So
Okay.
we'll be excellent.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
All right, and so are we kind of, sort of, almost fixing to be ready?
We're-
I'm talking.
Fixing. Yeah,
We're
We're
ready to go?
Yeah,
Let's do it.
we're ready to roll if you are.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
Great.
Well, good. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, because it means a lot that you were willing
course.
to do this, and it really means a lot that you sought us out, and I'm so grateful to you. But why don't we? Well, tell us. Let's just begin by saying, where are we sitting right now?
So we're in the Secretary of Education's office. That's the position I'm currently serving. It's the Patrick Henry building, and it's on the same floor. The governor's wing is on the opposite side of this floor. So this is where the executive branch operates out of for Virginia.
And let's go back.
Well, actually, before we start, can I get you saying your full name and what your position is here?
Sure. Atif Qarni, Virginia Secretary of Education.
So let's go back to the beginning and tell us about your life growing up. And when we talked, I remember that you were born in Pakistan,
Yes.
but you didn't live your whole childhood there. So talk a little bit about the early days.
So I was born in Karachi, Pakistan. When I was about 4 years old, we moved for a few years to United Arab Emirates in Sharjah and Dubai area. So I was there for about 4 years, went back and forth to Pakistan often, about twice a year. And then when I was about 8, we moved back to Karachi. And 2 years after that, when I was 10, my family and we moved to the United States.
Well, what are your memories of being in Pakistan? What was life like there for you and your family?
From my memories, it was very family oriented. We had a large family, extended family, and a lot of relatives. I enjoyed it. I have some good childhood memories growing up in Pakistan, and just going to the different markets and going to school there. I really enjoyed it.
So Karachi is a fairly large city.
Karachi is very, very populated. Yes, one of the most populated cities in the world. Yes.
And the markets and things. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
the culture.
Sure. My grandmother on Fridays, called the Jummah, is literally another in Urdu or Arabic. Urdu is the national language in Pakistan. It means Friday, but there's these Jummah markets, Friday markets. Generally, everybody's off on Friday because of the Friday prayers, and there's a lot of the markets are there. So it's my grandmother often would take me to different markets to shop for vegetables and fruits and different types of things. So those are some really good memories because I enjoyed spending time with her. My parents often traveled back and forth to Dubai for work. So when I was younger, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. So I really enjoyed that. And then my grandmother from my mom's side, who was retired, I remember spending time at her home because at her home, a lot of extended family lived, and it was a really large home. So it was different wings in the home, so everybody had their own privacy. So it was kind of neat, like experiencing that.
How about you mentioned the markets, but how about traditions that,
Mhm.
that you observed or experienced, whether it was dance or music or expressions that connected across the generations, going
Yeah.
deep into the
Yeah, some of the things I remember growing up. So my dad loved cricket, so he often took me to cricket games, to the stadiums. I remember doing that. Then there's in Pakistan, there's a big emphasis on drama, whether it's comedy or just serious dramas. So oftentimes we went to various plays, but it's not the plays in the setting of thinking of Broadway. It's a little bit different. So it's more of a casual setting when you go to plays. I remember going to some of those because my parents really enjoyed it. So as a child, obviously, you get dragged into going whatever your parents enjoy. Weddings were pretty big. I remember that as a child going to a lot of weddings, and the weddings are quite elaborate in Pakistani culture. So they don't last one day; they're multiple days. So there's like span of 3 or 4 days, and there's multiple events. So I certainly remember that, and the culture there, and the variety of foods, and it's a very colorful culture as far as dressing up. So that was very neat.
Pakistan is an Islamic country, and you mentioned Friday prayers, and so can you talk a little bit about being in an Islamic culture and what that was like for you?
Yeah, so my grandfather, who, was also close to retirement, he had a little bit more time. So oftentimes I would just go to walk with him to Friday prayers because there are a lot of different mosques in different neighborhoods which are accessible. So people could drive, but there's parking. I remember being parking issues, but the neighborhood that my grandparents lived in, it was walking distance, so I just remember just walking with him to Friday prayer. Sometimes I would go with my dad or other uncles and whatnot. I rather found it really boring as a child because just like if you're going to church, you have to sit there and it's a standard format. You have a sermon, and then you do the prayer part. I enjoyed the prayer part of it because I was short, and I knew that the Friday the weekly thing was coming to an end. So because there's a sermon in the beginning that an imam gives, and then there's a prayer part in the end. So that part, okay, we're almost done. So it was, but it was. It was a neat experience. Really enjoyed that. I didn't really think much about it until moving to the United States, because being in the culture both in UAE and in Pakistan, you really don't think about it as like, well, this is an Islamic country. You just, everybody kind of does it, so it's very normal. So you really don't really imagine it that way.
Well, I want to get into that. That's an important thing I hope we can talk about.
Sure.
But there was a time when your family decided to move. Did your family move? You didn't come by yourself.
I came, my parents and my dad came a few months before us. We had been sponsored for visas. We had some family here. So his brother sponsored him and he was sponsored. So we got, how you apply to get a visa, and there's a long waiting list and lottery and stuff. So they had applied, I think it took them, they had decided fairly quickly from what I've been told, that when we had moved back to Pakistan, that they had started the visa process, and it had got approved in 1988 when I moved. So we just moved together. So I have 2 younger brothers, so the 3 of us, my mom and my dad, we all moved.
What was the impulse to move to the United States? What led into that decision?
Yeah, my parents were quite frustrated because the crime rate in Karachi at that point, and it's quite bad. They were frustrated with the level of chaos and instability. And I do recall the school I went to, it was often closed due to bomb threats. It was a lot of instability. That's what I recall as a child. There was a lot of kidnappings type things also. I think my grandfather was kidnapped once because it was quite common. Like if you just see somebody with a nice car at a gas station, and so it was a lot of instability. So they wanted to an opportunity for their children to do well. United States, in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of immigrants, from that part of the world migrating. So they moved for a better opportunity and also to just get away from the instability.
Where did you land initially?
In New York. And then that was just for a few hours because we had to transfer, we had a transfer flight, and we came to BWI. And the reason we came to Baltimore is that's where my dad, who came about 2 months before us, and the reason he moved to Baltimore is because my uncle at that time was with was studying at Johns Hopkins. Him and his wife had settled in Baltimore just a year prior to that. So that's why we chose to live in Baltimore. If it was a few years before, I would have ended up in Miami because that's where my uncle was. So it's just pure coincidence ending up in Baltimore.
Can I jump in here?
Course. Yeah.
Because you mentioned first your grandmother and then your grandfather, and,
Yes.
and they seem to be very important figures in your life.
Yeah.
But then you just kind of nonchalantly mentioned that he was also kidnapped. That's really
significant. Yeah.
Let's. I mean, I don't mean to.
Would you like me to talk about that more?
I'm just interested in your relationship with your grandparents and what you remembered about them, and then
Sure.
maybe what it's like, what it was like to deal with something like that. Because I don't think people in the United States dealt with kidnappings like that.
Yeah. So this is again like when I was probably like 9, I think, and so it's very for a 9-year-old it's tough to. But actually, no harm came to him when he was kidnapped. From my recollection, it was at a gas station. The folks who make demands for stuff, my grandmother refused to pay and stuff. So a few hours later, they just kind of dropped them off and somewhere. And I think my dad or somebody just went and met him somewhere and picked him up. So was it a traumatic experience? I want to say not. I don't think it was that traumatic because nothing, fortunately, no serious harm came to him and stuff like that. But the reason I brought that up was that one occurrence of where I remember as a child there was a lot of instability at that time, and I don't know what the situation is. I really have not done a good job keeping up with what happens in Pakistan, but I do remember that when my parents were having conversations about why they're moving, that was one of the things. One, looking for an opportunity to going to the United States, but two, they were frustrated. I mean, I could sense the frustration with them with a lot of instability.
So, what were your feelings when you arrived? What was it like coming? You had obviously traveled some. You had seen some of the world and some impressive parts of the world, but you're coming into this brand new place. Was there anxiety or excitement, or what was it like?
There was, and it was cold. It was December when we came here, and I had never experienced winter before like that because the climates I had been in is pretty hot. So I do remember. I know my parents did get us like little windbreakers. I remember having a red windbreaker that they bought. But I mean, it wasn't really suitable for December weather. But I do remember it was cold, and I don't know. I wasn't excited or anxious either one. I mean, this is a 10-year-old. I was more like agitated because I felt like we did move quite often, and I was at that age in 4th grade, 5th grade time frame that I had started to make friends. So I wasn't really happy with my parents moving again to a completely different place, and I didn't really know much about the United States that much. I mean, culturally, I had seen things like Muhammad Ali or Michael Jackson and things like that, and the important cultures back then. But I wasn't really that aware of American culture, or I didn't speak the language or anything because we didn't learn English in the school I went to, so I knew of very few basic phrases and stuff.
Did your parents speak English?
They they spoke reasonable because with their education and work and everything, their interaction, you pick up on it a little bit, but it wasn't used at home, so I didn't really have much exposure to it.
So how about that experience for you of learning English? How did you learn, and what was it like to learn this new language?
Just getting fully immersed in school settings. So I came in the middle of 5th grade, and I do remember my first teacher, Mr. Teeter was his name, at Elmwood Elementary School in Baltimore. And the reason I remember him is very, very kind and understanding, and it was very difficult. And I actually, through the duration and continuum of education, I don't remember most of my teachers or even the classmates, but for some reason I remember that year because it was very different. I actually remember Tia, a student who really was helpful when she sat next to me and like getting me, accustomed to the school. She was really nice. Mr. Teeter was really nice. So I remember 5th grade actually much more than I do like some of the middle school years or high school years, because it was my first experience in the United States. So it was very difficult, like learning the language, but you definitely have to get fully immersed to learn it. I did pick up on it fast, for sure, especially the bad words, unfortunately.
Well, were there challenges of not knowing English? And what was that like?
Yeah, I definitely in reading and writing, for many years I had a lot of anxiety, because English being a second language for me, I did much better in mathematics, and I had a lot of anxiety with writing and reading and public speaking, which is funny because for a living now, I mean, I'm always giving speeches, so it took a while to. It took a really long time to get comfortable with that.
Well, as you began to get settled and your family began to immerse themselves in this new life,
yeah,
what were some of the other issues or challenges that you faced? Was it could be anything,
or accomplishments even, things that you really like take us through those kind of years in your life, those fresh American years, and
sure.
What's it like to be in your shoes at that point?
We were, I'm really proud of my parents, and my aunt and uncle who were like my parents. They were, now I'm here in the United States. My grandparents settled down here in the 90s, so they were still in Pakistan. So then I was not close to my aunt and uncle prior to the age of 10, but then after that I became close because it was just them and my parents, and they really worked hard to become doctors. My uncle and aunt are both doctors, and it's not like they're coming from any affluent families. They're just worked hard. They were intelligent, they were diligent. So I was really proud of him, being a doctor. My parents could not utilize their education in the United States because the degrees are not. They both only have undergraduates from Pakistan, so they didn't transfer over well. Even though my dad did banking in Pakistan, and he is very knowledgeable about it, he had a very tough time finding jobs here. So he had to do things like deliver pizzas. And do a lot of odd jobs, and then eventually he got into clerking because he was very talented. So once people got to know him that hey, he's really talented in the banking field, so he was able to get a job. But it took him a while to prove himself. And then my mom also, who was she was a journalist, and she did teach. She taught in Dubai and taught in Pakistan. In Pakistan, she was a journalist. She was on television. So in the Urdu literature, she's really well versed. She's written books, but her English, she's really struggled with that a lot because she had a very tough time. But she also worked hard, worked at Carvel ice cream store for several years, did babysitting and different things. But then I'm really proud of her because her passion was teaching, so she was eventually able to teach and be a special ed teacher for the remaining of her career. So she did that for 15 years in the United States. So that's I'm very proud of them because they really made a lot of sacrifice to do a lot of things, but they had a vision that, hey, we will, if we keep working hard, we'll get into the fields that we care about, and then we'll also pave the way for our children to be successful. And all three of their sons are very, very, I don't know, everybody defines success in a different way, but I feel that they're very successful. Both of my brothers are very happy in their careers. One of them is vice president for asset management in JP Morgan, like in Houston. The other one is, with AFL-CIO. He's done a lot in his life. And I'm fortunate enough to be in this position. So, that was my driving force to really work hard to make my parents proud, because they made such a sacrifice.
Did your family find a supportive Pakistani community that you entered into, an Islamic community? Was that part of it to the story?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I'm very close to the Muslim community in the DMV area, in Baltimore and Virginia. And the reason for that is because a lot of the folks who came in the 70s and 80s, they had the similar struggles. So they had the similar experiences, whether the funny thing is, they're Muslims from all over the world. So our family friends are Indian Muslims and we're Pakistani Muslims. So all the tensions about India and Pakistan back home, or Kashmir and stuff, that all goes out the window. Up here in the United States, you gravitate towards each other because you have similar challenges and experiences. So the mosque communities are very diverse from all different backgrounds, from Middle East to Iran and North Africa and East and West Africa. So there's the Muslim communities are very diverse, and Islamic Society of Baltimore had just emerged also in the early 80s. So my parents were they got involved with that, because my parents are actually quite very big on culture. They're not as big on religious practice. So they're very close to the Pakistani community in Baltimore also, because my mom, who's in literature, she's into poetry. So they do a lot of these things that's called mushairas. It's basically where poets get together and do poetry, and it's really big in Pakistani culture. So they really right away established a network of friends, and that has gotten bigger and bigger in Maryland side. And when I settled in Virginia, I noticed that there were similar things that happened in Virginia also.
You said when I settled in Virginia, so did you come to Virginia on your own, or did your family move?
On my own. So when my wife and we met at George Washington University, and I was in the Marine Corps Reserves. At the time I was wrapping up our thing. I did a little bit of, I did some active duty. I was deployed to Iraq in 2003. So after all my military service was wrapped up, her studies her degrees were all wrapped up and so forth. We had just had our firstborn. So this was about 15 years ago, and we were thinking about where to settle. So we considered, should we move to a Maryland area? Should we stay in DC, because we were in DC at that time? And then we had neither one of us had experienced Virginia, but coincidentally her parents had just moved from DC, because they had retired completely, and they had moved to Manassas, Virginia. So when we were visiting them, we really liked Manassas a lot, and my wife prefers more of a city environment, but I was really pleased with the openness. So we bought a home that was really, there was a lot of space and openness, and it was really peaceful. So that's what appealed to us, and that's why we settled down. So it was our own decision, but it was also kind of tied to, because her family had happened to just move there a year before.
I'm getting out of chronological order here,
Yes.
but that's okay. It has to happen.
Sure.
Can I ask you what it was like being a Muslim in the Marine Corps serving in Iraq?
Yeah, it was a very, I learned a lot. It was a very great experience for me, because I think that's really shaped me a lot. Being in the military in general, I served 8 years, was great because it really focuses on leadership and gives you organization and structure. Being a Muslim, I went into the service before September 11th, but my service went, it went beyond September 11th. It was the military unit that I was with. They were very protective of me, so they knew me. They knew my religion. They knew I was Muslim, but so they were very protective of me to make sure that there was no discriminatory practices in the military. So that was great, and it was an interesting experience going to Iraq in 2003. I was one of the first troops to enter Iraq when the war started, and I really served proudly. And it was a stressful time for the country as a whole, for my family and everyone. There was a lot of anxiety because I don't know if you recall, at that point, September 11th happened in 2001, and shortly after, a few years, there was a lot of tensions, and there was a lot of hate crimes and so forth that were happening in the United States. But my parents were also proud of the fact, and my family was, that I was able to serve, and they spoke about that more and more, that hey, look, this is something that we're as American as anybody else. So that was a great experience, and I gained a lot from having served in the military, but especially in Iraq. I mean, just seeing the things there on the ground, on the field, on the instability there, and the poverty there. It was a life-changing experience to see that. And as a matter of fact, that's why I started really heavily reflecting that I want to do something more meaningful with my life, because at that time I was seriously considering maybe going into law school. I was working also as a trial paralegal before I got deployed, because I was in the reserves and I got activated to go to Iraq for 6 months. So I was bouncing around with the idea of maybe going into law school. But then when I was in Iraq, I was like, I really want to do something meaningful with my life. Being military service has been great, and what is it that I want to do when I'm finished with my service? And that's when I decided to go into teaching, because I reflected on my mother's teaching experience. One of my grandmothers was a teacher and a principal in Pakistan. So that's why I went into teaching later on.
You mind if I
No,
jump in?
Yes.
But the answer is if I'd asked.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Sure.
So do you think that being an American soldier was uniquely put you in the mindset of wanting to do something for other people, or do you think if you'd have seen that as a soldier, because at that time it was a coalition of the willing,
Yeah.
it's a big what if, but if you had joined the Pakistani military and
Yeah.
you had seen that through the eyes of a Pakistani soldier, what is the difference being an American soldier as opposed to a Pakistani soldier, or if you could what if that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know. I don't know how that would have changed. I'm not sure, because you have to experience it, I guess, to see if what country's military you're serving in. But so I didn't talk about this openly when the Iraq war was going on in 2003. I kind of shut down, and I didn't talk to family much about it or other folks, because again, if you recall, there was also a lot of opposition to the war too, and in my opinion, war is not good. We should never. I'm a military guy, but we should never go to war. We should really work on measures to prevent any conflict whatsoever. But I'm also a big believer in serving your country when needed. So those conflicts were definitely in my brain, like happening, but I never talked about it for many years. So after coming back home, it was actually quite difficult. I think it was in general, being in the military service is a lot, when you've seen a lot of actions, it's difficult to talk about. But also being a Muslim, I just didn't want to talk to anybody about it. And it took me several years to get comfortable talking about my military experience, even with my family members, and they were really really patient and understanding. And I'm just gonna be frank with you. I mean, there was a lot of anger and stuff last few years. I mean, I used to have nightmares, for a couple of years after coming back, and I also had a guilty thing about because my oldest son was born when I was overseas, and my wife was 7 months pregnant when I left for Iraq with her firstborn. My commanding officer was very nice. Major McGrath offered that I could wait and deploy later and join my unit later, and have watch be there for my son's birth. That was a difficult decision. My wife was very supportive, and I do feel guilty because I decided to deploy with my unit because I didn't want anybody to say that I was not loyal to my country, because especially being a Muslim, and I really, had trained with my Marines, with my unit for a very long time to get ready, to get deployed, and I didn't want to let them down. So I did have a lot of guilt coming back, missing my son's birth. And it was not just me, actually. Another friend of mine, he was in the same situation. His wife was also pregnant. She was 5 months pregnant, and he missed her, his child's birth also. So he also felt very, very guilty as well. And he's not Muslim, I mean, but again, he also was like, look, this is my duty, I have my orders, and I gotta go serve. So it was interesting to be, in a situation knowing somebody else in that situation. But it took a while to kind of come to, and I still do feel guilty missing my son's birth, but you come to terms with it. So that was sorry, I know I kind of completely went off tangent.
This is really interesting, and it's, I think that speaks to the sense of duty.
Yeah.
It's I can't imagine having to make that decision.
Yeah.
And it's especially if you're feeling that connected. And I know the camaraderie that comes with the military service.
Right.
Is very strong.
Right.
And that's a fact.
Right.
I don't know if that's uniquely American or not. I doubt it is, but I think it's unique.
I think it's a military camaraderie. I don't know. I can't speak for other countries, but because when you've trained with people for years, and you're finally asked to deploy, and this is what you've trained for, it's really tough. And there's the 20 of us who were really, really close. We're still close now. Like, we stay in touch. Actually, as a matter of fact, one of my friends, I had lost touch with him after, we served together in Iraq. I reconnected with him after this appointment because he works right across the street at the anatomy lab here at VCU. So he came to the office and stuff, and we were talking about our experience and stuff. So it was really interesting. It kind of came full circle that we stayed in touch over Facebook, but we didn't see each other face to face. So now I get a chance to see him often. So that was really interesting.
Let me back up a second.
Sure.
When you made the decision to join the military,
Yeah.
whether it had been the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps,
Yes.
what was in your mind about in terms of service?
I had two friends. I ran track and field in high school, and two of my friends I ran track with. I had told them that I've always wanted to think about joining the military as a child. If I was growing up in Pakistan, I probably would have ended up joining the military because I think it's really cool. I think that's really cool. I don't have good vision, but if I did, I probably would have tried to fly planes because you have to have 20/20 vision to be a pilot. So that's something I always had a dream of doing. The recruiters had a good presence in our high school, the Marine Corps recruiters, and I had heard great things about the Marines. Again, this is a 17-year-old who's only been in the country for 7 years, so you learn pretty fast. And at that time, my senior year, that's when also I started to become comfortable a little bit in my English abilities because it took a while. And and I'm playing a lot of sports, so my confidence also went up because I'm running track and field. And and I had been in Baltimore for a while, so that's why I have a big connection to Baltimore. Also, because then you make friends. I made friends in middle school, and then you move up to high school, and you kind of overcome some of the. They get to know you. You get to know them. That hey, this is not really bullying or discrimination. It's a cultural differences. They might be saying something that might not. So you learn, right? So at that time, I was in a very interesting space where so my two of my good friends were like, hey, Marines, you should think about it. So I'm like, all right, let's do it. And we all three of us went to boot camp together in Paris Island. So that's how I joined the Marines. And my parents, my dad was happy, my mom was completely opposed to it. She did not want me to do it at all. But that's what happened.
When you were that age, and especially, you said that you joined the Marine Corps before 2001, so you bridged over that moment in our country's history. Did you ever experience any negativity, any fear that people sometimes have of Muslims?
Not fear necessarily. I mean, there was a few instances where some people made remarks, inappropriate remarks. But the good thing was that for that one individual making remarks, like my other Marines and stuff stood up and got very, very angry, and because they're very protective, because we're protective of each other. So there were a few individuals who made inappropriate remarks, Islamophobic remarks, if you want to say it. But overall, I felt like I was really protected in that space.
If I might, you may have felt protected, but did your family encounter any of that? I know at that time it was, it was harsh. It was really harsh.
It was. My wife wears a hijab, and she chooses to. And the rest of her sisters don't. And it's a lot of Muslim women in America, I don't believe, wear hijab, but she does, and there's I think it's a growing population that's of women who's choosing to wear a hijab for a variety of reasons. She's experienced some discrimination. I remember being at the metro. Her and I were taking a metro to work in DC, and somebody made an inappropriate remark. This was after September 11th, like something related to Osama bin Laden or something. We kind of just laughed it off because we have pretty thick skins, but so things like that. I didn't have fear for me. I did have anxiety about her maybe getting discriminated against because she wears a hijab. She recently, a couple of years ago, it was 2 years ago, she had an incident at the DMV in Manassas where the workers, because she wears a hijab, was not serving her and was denying her service, and she, complained about that and dealt with it, and she's faced discrimination for her hijab a couple of times since September 11th. It hasn't been extreme, but it's still bad. So I have more anxiety for her. But she's a very strong woman. She's a very strong person, so I don't worry too much. She stands up for herself real well. And I do have more anxiety for Muslim children, especially, that they might feel targeted. But I do feel that things are getting better and moving in the right direction, despite the recent shift in our leadership in our country. I do feel that the millennial generation, the Gen X generation, is very, very tolerant of everyone, whether it's the Latino community or the Muslim community. I go to a lot of schools in Virginia and talk to a lot of students, and I feel they're much more aware than our generation was.
Why do you think that is?
I think, with technology, there's a little bit more awareness, and technology is good and bad in some ways, because there's a lot of misrepresented information. But I think I do feel that there it allows for more information flow, so you can learn more about different cultures. So I do feel that exposure really helps.
Virginia is a much more diverse place than it was in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So do you think that diversity begets? I don't like to use the word tolerance, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Is it just the fact that we are a more diverse place, and so we're becoming more comfortable with it?
I don't know if diversity necessarily causes things to be more peaceful. It's how it's managed, because there's a lot of diverse regions of the world that there's a lot of chaos. So it's really how we're tolerant of each other. I think if we see ourselves as one entire unit and not different subunits, I think if a community can do that well, that hey, if you are looking at the stars and the sky and stuff, if you see them as a unit and they're much more beautiful than individualized, if there's a way to kind of do that, some communities do that much better than others. Like some of the schools I've been to, which are very, very diverse, culturally diverse, they do a really good job in really being more harmonious, as opposed to there's other schools that I've been to that there might be more tensions. And a school could be very diverse, but there might be tensions between subgroups. So it's really how it's managed.
Well, that leads us into your classroom experience.
Yes.
When you became a teacher, and we
Yeah.
haven't really talked about how that happened, but maybe we can come back to it. What was your classroom like? I mean, what age did you teach,
Mhm.
and who were the students? And it's in Woodbridge, if I remember rightly.
Yes,
and so
in
that's
Dale
a
City.
Very, very
Yes.
diverse
In
community.
Woodbridge.
Talk a little about
Yeah, so I taught for 10 years. The first 7 years I did math, and the last 3 years I did civics and economics. I taught 8th grade for all 10 years. Every now and then I would get like a section of a 6th grade or 7th grade class if there was like a shortage of a teacher. But I still had 90% of my teaching section experience has been with 8th graders. So that's where my expertise lies. And in my student teaching, I tried high school teaching, but it was fun. I really enjoyed it. But for some reason, 8th grade just seemed like the right fit. I taught in a very diverse school. The classroom, I would describe my classroom as not overly decorative with stuff, but it's a very warm feeling, like when you walk in, because it's children really having a lot of interaction. It's a loud classroom, not loud in a bad way, but like loud in a way that they're really enjoying themselves. At my school, my teachers, fellow teachers, and administrators really understood that's the classroom that kids really enjoy going to that class. And that's what I really took pride in, is like really building the relationships with the children to really understand what they're going through. I spent a lot of time cycling around during the school year to maybe sit down and have lunch with, and just kind of get to know, see, okay, what are you going through? And you learn a lot by talking to children while they're in the hallway socializing or having lunch with them, to talk about non-instructional related things, to kind of really get to know them. And I think that actually helps in the classroom, because I was really fortunate that was able to really demonstrate very good results. And I know, unfortunately, we get measured by our assessments, and I didn't have any problems with that, and I was able to demonstrate a lot of growth and high results because and that's why I did win Teacher of the Year in Dale City in 2016. And it took a while for a lot of my coworkers and stuff to kind of understand that, hey, that's what his style is. Because one of the things I did really, really poorly is writing lessons. I was not organized, and was not overly decorative. My classroom, you go in, it's not going to blow your mind. You're going to walk in, it's very dull, doesn't have a lot of posters up. It's mostly student work. But it was like the connection I have with the students is really powerful. If you read any of the stories, or if you see the students came to visit at Bevel, if you see any interaction, it's really, really powerful. It's really about those relationships. So that's what I really took pride in a lot.
Where did most of your students come from? What-
Countries like El Salvador, Honduras, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, all over Ghana. Ghana, there's a big population from Ghana, from Nigeria, Kenya. Prince William County is very diverse. Dale City, Woodbridge area is even more diverse. Our school was probably close to 50%, Central or South American countries. A lot of African Americans. So it's very, very diverse. So they were all from all over the globe.
Are there some challenges with such a diverse population?
Mm-hmm.
I think you've talked about, it's important to make these connections,
Mm-hmm.
but, and we typically see diversity as a strength.
Yes.
However, it's got to be tough at times.
Yeah, I guess if you want to call that a challenge, I know that it's a transient population. You have some military families, but also new immigrant families coming in, so they're still not fully settled, and so you do see challenges with that, and some language barriers. But for me, it wasn't a challenge because I had been through that experience, and I think that's another reason why I connected with the student population that it is, because I saw a lot of them in me, and they saw that in me, because we had gone through that experience of learning English as a second language, coming from that similar background. And I think that really helped a lot, because I was one of the few teachers that could really, in my school, had that same experience as a lot of the children. So that was probably a major reason why there was so much success.
What percentage of your students would you say were ESL?
It varied section to section. I normally had a class which was all ESL at some, like, almost 100%. Some classes might be only 10%, 5% overall. A good amount. I say maybe overall as a school, maybe 25% to 30%. At some years it might be a little bit higher or lower. Yeah.
So it's significant.
It's significant. Yeah, I had almost every year I had a class which was almost nearly 100% ESL. With the scheduling and so forth, it almost worked out that way. Yeah. So, and I had an ESL, and I had the SPED population was quite high in our school as well. So yeah.
What made you decide, going back a little bit, what made you decide to want to become a teacher?
Yeah, so when I was in Iraq, I had a chance to kind of reflect to see what do I want to do, and there's also oftentimes downtime while you're waiting for stuff to happen, because you really don't. It's not like a regular work schedule, so you get the chance to reflect on life and see, okay, what do you want to do. And that's when I made my decision. I actually specifically remember when I decided to be a teacher. I was sitting in, they're called 2-man tents, and I was just sitting in there, and I think eating MRE, and it just clicked. And I'm like, I'm gonna be a teacher. I was thinking about a lot of things, and I was very excited. So when I came back from Iraq and I wrapped up my contract in 2004, finished up my military service, I didn't become a teacher, start teaching until 2008, because I didn't have any, I had to do my master's and get my teaching credentials, so that obviously took a couple of years, but there was a sense of urgency when I got back. So from like 05 to 08, I just aggressively started working on a master's and teaching credentials, and I told my wife, this is what I want to do. She's like, what happened to law school? Or because I was as a paralegal when I had deployed, and I'm like, what about that? Like, nope, this is what I want to do. So that's
when you think about.
Can I just jump in, because
Sure.
there's a bit there. You said it clicked. What was it that clicked?
Yeah, I don't know. I was just again, I was reflecting a lot, and just thinking about doing something meaningful out of life. Because you're like, life is short. I want to do something really, really meaningful, and it's just I was thinking about different career paths. I'm like, do I want to be an attorney or and it's just teaching, and I have good role models as teachers in my life. So my mother, who was a teacher. I didn't tell you about my grandmother from my mom's side. The grandmother I had mentioned earlier a lot, that was my grandmother from my dad's side. I was really close to her. But my grandmother from my mom's side was also an inspirational figure because they migrated from India in 1947 when the migration occurred. So it was five sisters, and their parents had passed away. So for five women to migrate on their own is tough, and she was the oldest of the five, so she was a very tough lady, and she migrated to Karachi, and she was a teacher. And later on in the 50s, the Ford Foundation had set up a fund to fund schools in Pakistan. And one of the schools was a all-girls model school in Karachi, and she was the first principal who opened that. So I grew up with hearing a lot of stories from my mom about my grandmother being a principal and seeing my mother as a teacher. So that is something that I'm like, okay, that's really, really meaningful. So I guess to answer your question, what clicked is like that was the yeah. Does that make sense?
That's
Does that
beautiful.
make sense?
Yeah,
Makes sense?
yeah. And
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that story too.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So you're 9 years plus minus a little bit in the classroom.
Yes.
When you think about it as a whole, what stands out for you?
My span of teaching.
Yes.
Gosh, there's so many great moments. The best moments are when former students come back to visit. I have a lot of students who came back to visit. Almost on a daily basis, I could not get out of the classroom. I did coaching and so forth for track and stuff. But a lot of former students came back to visit and saying, "This is what I'm doing." One child that I specifically remember, I taught her in my early career. I taught her math. She was devastated. She was taking the SOL. She got a 392. You need a 400 to pass. It's just whatever. I guess the state has decided that thing's very silly in my opinion. That measure, but. Leticia had failed, and she was so devastated because she was really diligent. And I talked to her short. I'm like, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. But she put a lot of pressure on herself. I met her recently. She is in college now, and she said, "Mr. Qarni, I not only passed my algebra 1 and my geometry, math SOLs, but now I did well in high school." Again, this is an immigrant child, and the thing is, again, she's going through those language experiences as well and anxieties. So it's very normal that students will struggle, but then you can still be successful later on. And she was working at Starbucks to pay through, working through high school. But Starbucks, I think, offers like college assistance and stuff. So she took advantage of that and other opportunities, went to Nova. She's at George Mason now. I mean, she's doing great. So that stands out a lot, like those kind of things. So that's one story from a former student that really stands out, that, she still remembers that one. I don't call it failure, like a learning experience, but she hasn't let go of that. And I also feel like I'll go back and I'm like, I haven't let go of I didn't do so well on my reading in SATs, but I was taking it when I was still learning English. But I'm proud of her because, she's been successful in my opinion. I think she used that as a driving force that, hey, I can do better. Not as a failure, but that learning experience that I really need to continue to do better. And that's something that I remember.
Well, we talk about success, and
Yeah.
there are many forms of success.
Yes.
We agree on that. But you've risen very quickly to the top of your profession. You're Secretary of Education for the
Yes.
Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yeah.
When that came,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk a little bit about the feeling of what that was?
Yeah, I was very numb that day. So I got the call on December 20th. The Chief of Staff, Mr. Mercer, had sent me a message saying that you will be receiving a phone call around 10 o'clock, and I know you'll be teaching during that class. I know you have class, but I really need you to pick up the phone. So I knew that the governor was going to be calling. I wasn't sure if it was going to be about. I mean, I had interviewed for the position, but I didn't know if I was going to be offered that or if he was just going to just let me down gently, or offer maybe something else. Because I thought it was a long shot to begin with. But I got the phone call, and Governor Northam was like, "I'm really sorry. I know you're teaching. It's 10 o'clock. I had a class and I asked the children that I really need to step out. I know the phone is always off and I'm teaching, but I apologize. It's an emergency." They had no idea. They were just goofing off. I closed the door, I come outside in the hallway, and he said, I really want a K-12 teacher in this position, and I hope that would you want to do it? And I think I had a half a second pause, and I'm like, yes. So it was a great feeling, and the even better feeling was that the governor said that I would really like to come to your school tomorrow and announce it in front of your students. So I was just on top of the world. I'm like, oh my God, what? Just it's a great. I'm like, really? So he's such an amazing person. Just to be thoughtful in that, thinking that he wanted to do it in front of, announce it in front of the students. So I'm like, yes, sir. That's great. So I was, grateful for that opportunity. And he came the next day, and actually, as soon as I got a lunch break, I literally ran to the front office to find my principal. And I'm like, Mr. Keenan, I really need to talk to you. And he's like, something happened, like somebody got in a fight or something. He didn't know. I'm like, please, I need to close the door. I went to his office, closed the door. And my principal, actually, I hadn't told him that I was being considered for this position at all. So it was a big surprise for him, and he just was ecstatic. And it was really happy. So just to see the joy on my principal's face. And then I didn't tell the students about, because the governor said we can't, just tell your principal, we'll set up a press conference, but don't tell anyone because we want to announce it. So only very few friends and family knew. I didn't tell my students. And I picked about 20 students from the 180 that I teach. I drew the names out of the thing, and they were in the library. And that's a picture right there in the library. That's our library at Bevel Middle School. And we had 20 students in there. We had some teacher friends of mine that I work closely with, and some of my very, very close friends and family. My wife's parents and my parents, and my brother, and so they were all there at the library. And on December 21st, and he announced it. He spoke to the students first, and I had just told the students that, hey, you're coming to the library, and the governor is going to be making a big announcement. And they didn't know until that moment that I was going to be Secretary of Education, and the kids were just on top of the world. And then some of the kids were I stayed for the rest of the day. I didn't want to leave. My principal's like, this is your last day, just go home. I'm like, no, I want to finish out my teaching because they wanted me to kind of transition right away. But I finished out the day, and a lot of students came, so it was kind of a bittersweet. They were happy, but they were also there was a lot of tears. But it was such a indescribable feeling. My body was all just numb the whole day. But especially when he made that announcement, and I'll tell you a little secret. I haven't told my wife or anybody. You're the first one to hear this, but whenever there's a challenging day or stressful day, since the job and stuff, I go back to the YouTube video and watch the announcement again, because it just makes my day watching that. And I've seen that video so many times when he announces it, and stuff. It was great feeling. Yeah, sorry, I know that was a really long answer.
No, that is a beautiful.
Yeah.
If I could ask an additional one on that one, I know I'm kind of jumping down this one a lot, but
yeah.
What do you think it means to new immigrants to see an immigrant in this job?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't realize the importance of it until a few days later, because you get a lot of phone calls and so forth. The Pakistani community is very, very happy because it's not a big diaspora in the United States compared to the other groups. So there is a sense of insecurity that why are we not doing as well as other immigrant communities, and there's a lot of talk about instability back in Pakistan. So this was a big accomplishment. So I've got multiple calls from the Pakistani embassy to come to events. Actually, I was supposed to go to an event tomorrow. I can't go because I had another conflict. But they're very happy. So the embassy folks have invited me to do different things. And I'm meeting the ambassador on Monday night. He's going to be here in Richmond for dinner. And he was like, bring your wife for dinner at the embassy. And then the Pakistani community in Virginia, in Maryland, the folks that I grew up with, they're so happy. And be so many phone calls to come have dinner with us. They keep talking about it. A lot of there's these Pakistani media groups have picked up on it. I actually got a call from I've received calls from overseas, from Dubai, from Pakistan. Not calls, I'm sorry, Facebook messages. But my parents are really enjoying it because my dad got a call from an old college friend of his, and this lady said, "Oh, there is a guy who got Pakistani guy who got appointed Virginia Secretary of Education, and you live near Virginia. Like, do you know this person?" So, so my dad was bragging about that story. That's my son, So I'm really happy for them because again, like I told you earlier, that I'm very close to the community, the Muslim community, the Pakistani community, and the challenges that they face. So I'm really happy for them too because they really are enjoying this. They really are, and they should enjoy it because it's not an accomplishment of one individual, but as a community, because there's and it's like we are all in this together, like a unit. I'm talking about. It's not one individual. So. That's something that they're very happy about, and I've gotten so much positive feedback. I mean, they rave about it a lot.
What are some of your dreams for the future of education in Virginia? And I don't necessarily mean in the policy sense or changing the standards or anything like that. I mean more on the level of what should education be, especially considering how diverse we are.
Yeah, so we're diverse in Northern Virginia. We're diverse in the greater Richmond area, in Hampton Roads or Harrisonburg. In South Side and Southwest, the diversity might not be there, but that's okay because each region of the Commonwealth is different. We, over the years, and it's just not Virginia or just not the United States, but in general, globally too, I pay attention to a lot of education systems, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in South Asia or East Asia or Middle East. Over time, there's been a lot of toxic nature of assessments, and there's been a cultural issue with that. There's been a lot of attack on, especially in public education. So I know that this might not be accomplished in just a short span of 4 years, but everywhere I go or anywhere I go, we really need to focus on the positive aspects of education. That why do teachers join the education corps? They do it because they want to inspire, they want to work with young people to expand their imagination on what they can do with their life. So focus on that. Focus on why we have an education system in general. It's just to really gain knowledge and an understanding of the world in all different elements. So really try to change the culture. So something that I hope to accomplish is that 4 years from now, when people look back, is that this individual brought so much positivity to education that it's really we started to have a cultural shift, that we focus on the positives and all the great things we do. One of the questions, I was in Hampton a few days ago, and it was a town hall, and it's all recorded, it's all on video. And we had talked about the challenges that Hampton, the region, is having. And there were some folks from Newport News talking about the challenges the school have, and things about teacher pay and class sizes, and all this stuff came up, the usual stuff. And I got good responses about that. But the funny thing is, so I asked the question, because after they had done asking their questions, I asked, "What is it that's something you do really well in Hampton?" That's the only question I asked, and the response was phenomenal. Almost every single person in the town hall went over time because they had so many examples of a lot of positivity. There were so many responses, and if folks start to focus more on the positive elements and everything, and we support those things, then we'll overcome a lot of the other challenges we have. And I think I hope to really change that and like kind of have a cultural shift in the next 4 years. And that's why I'm so grateful to work for Governor Northam, because he's a very positive person. He is focusing on those positives. So I think he's the ideal leader that we need for this time in education. I think we're in a really interesting time in education. There's a lot of this conversation happening, and I think we couldn't find a better person to lead the Commonwealth in that space. So that's why I'm also so excited to be serving under his administration.
When you say we're at an interesting time in
Yeah.
education, time of change,
Yeah.
what's happening?
Yeah, so the last 20 years there's been a lot of focus on standardized testing, with No Child Left Behind coming in, and the SOL. So that they were kind of, revolutionary for their times. But there is a thing called Every Student Succeed Act that was passed in 2015. So it's going to allow for more flexibility for the states, and there it has been, we're moving in the right direction. The General Assembly has done some work, the Board of Education and the Department of Education has done some work, our administration has done some work that we're going to see a more of a focus on more project-based learning and performance-based assessments rather than standardized testing, and it's going to focus more on growth of a child as opposed to just passing a test. So, and as a whole, as you notice that there's these teacher strikes happening across the country. So we kind of came to a tipping point. But in Virginia, I think our model is going to be very different, because I think we're ahead of the game. I think we anticipated this stuff, and we're ahead of the game, and I think we're seeing a lot of positive changes. So you will see in the next 4 years there'll be some significant things that will occur, and that will change the course of education.
Sometimes when families come here,
Yeah.
parents are not literate in their own languages. And so the children are entering into public schools, becoming more and more skillful. Have you had any experience with those kinds of dynamics? And is there anything that is worth saying about that?
It's different. I mean, all parents want their children to succeed. What that looks like is very different, because some parents might say, well, you might be better off going into work right away as opposed to going to college. So, join a family business. And that might be good for some children, that might not be good for some children. So there's definitely that tug of war happening, because some folk culturally might think, hey, this is what we need to do, and this might be our limits. I'll use, not to be stereotypical, but in our the student population that I was serving, there's a lot of parents who are business owners in the landscaping industry or the construction industry. So there was those conversations happening where, well, my son could go into that field, or daughter could go into that field, or there was a lot of emphasis on cosmetics or fashion, which is nothing wrong with that. So I did see some students kind of have that friction that, hey, I want to do something else. So that's definitely was there. And that hasn't changed since the beginning of time. I mean, parents have certain expectations, so that's everywhere in the globe. Yeah.
Going back to the beginning of this journey for you, when you were leaving Pakistan, and you said that your parents made that decision partly for opportunity and partly for security.
Yes.
More of an orderly life.
Yes.
Do you think that's, maybe the answer is obvious, but do you think that's been achieved in your?
Well, I guess looking at it now, they would define that as successful. There were challenging times. I mean, my father especially he definitely struggled a lot because with that decision, because when he was making that decision, so I definitely think that in his mind he never talked about it with any of us, but I could see that did I make the right decision in 1988. Now if you ask him, he's on top of the world, especially with the disappointment, but he's had a tough life, and then my mother has as well. They both have, making that transition here, because even though there was a lot of instability in Pakistan, they still had a lot of family support system there, and their friends and everything there. So that was a difficult decision, and then coming here kind of like on an island by yourself, and the only individual they had is his brother and stuff. So that's why we've also became very close to them. But it's tough. It's tough. But yeah, they would define that as a successful journey. I think if you asked them that would they have done it again, yeah, they would say yes.
Let's talk just for a second about Virginia. Does being here and doing this work in Virginia, is that special in any way to you? Does being a Virginian have particular meaning as opposed to being a Marylander or being an Ohioan?
Yeah, it does. I again accidentally moved to Virginia because my in-laws had just moved there, but I have learned so much, and I've been in Virginia for 15 years, and I define myself as Virginian first, not a Marylander, because it is such a beautiful history in Virginia. If you look at a full contextual, have an understanding of it, we're a state that was the first in the resistance, but then we're also a state of Jim Crow. So having that historical significance in Virginia is very important. And I look at how my experiences as an immigrant and my challenges kind of tie into all that. It's a great place to be, really understand that. And then we see all the shift happening in Virginia with it becoming more diverse, but then still having, you can't find that in many places where different regions of Virginia are very different. So Northern Virginia is very different from Southwest. And I have a good fortune in my position to travel all over the Commonwealth, and they're so different, and they're great in their own ways, but they also have challenges in their own ways. So I really enjoy being a Virginian. I'm so fortunate because I think we really have an opportunity as Virginians to kind of really lead the way if we do things really well and be a model for the rest of the country.
How do you feel about Pakistan when you think about it? Do you have a relationship to that?
That's a good question. So I am the only family member that hasn't been back in 30 years. I'm 40, so I have never been back to Pakistan. I've been to other countries. I've been to Japan because I was in the Marines, and I've been to Iraq. And my wife and I have traveled to different countries. I haven't been back to Pakistan because during the transition, all our family moved here, so there was really not really strong ties there. My brothers went back a while ago for a wedding. My parents have gone back a couple of times, but I've done a really bad job staying in touch. I'm very culturally connected with the Pakistani community here in the United States, but overseas I'm not. I mean, I don't know. If you ask me who the prime minister is, I don't know, or who the general. I just don't know. I don't pay attention.
So how about that cultural connection? How do you keep that?
The cultural connection is through food. Honestly, through food, not as much as with music and poetry. There is, I guess, to be fair, I'm not that connected in the Pakistani culture as much as other folks might be, but I still have a significant connection because my parents kind of keep me engaged because they're always doing cultural events. So I always end up going to cultural events because they're like, hey, especially now because they want to show me off. So they're like, so hey, you have to go. There's a Pakistan Day festival that happens every year in Bull Run in Northern Virginia. So I attend that. I've been speaking there in the last few years because there's only very few of us who are kind of involved in civic activity in the Pakistani community in Virginia. So I just end up kind of being involved in that. And I'm sure in August they'll ask me to come speak there, because especially being in this position. And I actually went there last year with the governor, and introduced him to, because he was giving a speech there. So that's, I guess, one example of how I kind of stay connected with the community.
Well, and food is a good answer too.
Food is the
Yeah.
best way. Food is if you ask me for some good food suggestions, I know a lot of good restaurants in the northern
It's
Virginia.
none of my business is off the record, but did you and your wife have a traditional wedding?
Yeah, that was very interesting. So my wife is half white and half Iranian. So our wedding we didn't spend we only spent $1,500 on our wedding because we didn't have any money. We got married while still finishing up college. I was in my senior year wrapping it up. It was culture. Like the only time she really wore the shalwar kameez was during her wedding thing, and she refused to wear it afterwards. And that was because my grandmother made the dress. So it was kind of pseudo-cultural, yeah.
Well, when you think about your journey, which obviously isn't nearly finished,
Yeah.
is there anything that we haven't talked about, since we're talking about immigration stories, that you think you would like for us to know, you would like for your fellow Virginians to know about what it means to be an immigrant, to live through those times? You've had a kind of quintessential American success story.
Yes.
Anything that you would just like people to know?
I mean,
or think about?
I think, it's, we are kind of in a world where, the more exposure we have to different people, even if we're living in areas where it might not be as diverse, if we could do it through virtual exchange, it's good to know about different experiences because we grow as an individual. I'm still learning because I don't think I'm as culturally aware, even though I have exposure, but there's a lot of different cultural backgrounds that I have not myself been exposed to, or different types of people. So I think that for Virginians, and I told this to a group of students today at a high school, and this is James River High School where the student population is very diverse, is that I know that these students are going to go travel all over the world, and that's a dream for everyone to go travel the world, but they really need to travel Virginia because I think, we are really not getting, Virginians, I would really encourage them to travel Virginia because I feel guilty for not having done that earlier. In this job, it allowed me to travel, and I'm going to different parts of Virginia and just meeting with all kinds of folks in different regions, and it's really, really great. And I think that if Virginians do that, I think that even the tensions we might have within the Commonwealth, I think will break down those barriers between Southwest, Southside, and Northern Virginia. So that is something that I think that I really want to emphasize that folks really consider doing.
Thank you. That's a great place to stop, unless you can think of something that I've left out.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment, and I
Yeah.
wholeheartedly agree. I mean,
Yeah.
we travel all over the state for our work, and
Yeah.
to be able to be in Hayside and see what's going on there, and then come to Arlington,
Yeah.
and you can hardly get any more different in the same state.
Yeah.
And when you can see connection though,
Yeah.
and you can make a connection, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So well put.
Thank you.
So is traditional Pakistani food substantially different from Indian, Bangladeshi food?
Not substantially different. In Bangladesh, there is a big emphasis on fish because there's a lot of fishermen. In India, because of religious reasons, India has a lot of subcultures too. So the Sikh traditions, there's a little bit more meat. A lot
Excuse me,
of
there's a Sikh festival tomorrow, did you know?
I did not know.
Here in Richmond.
Oh, here in
I
Richmond.
just heard about it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
I sent you a note.
yeah, there's not a big emphasis on meat in Pakistan. There's a lot of emphasis on meat. They're heavy on meat. Like it's really interesting. Like it's bizarre. Like there's just so much meat involved. And I've noticed with Indian food, there's a lot more sauces as opposed to Pakistan food. There's a lot more mixture with rice. Yeah, so that's what I've noticed.
I've seen that when I've been to Pakistani
Yeah.
dinners. It's
Yeah.
everybody waits for the rice.
Yeah.
The rice dish is the main attraction, whereas
Yeah.
it's more in Bangladeshi and what I've seen in the Indian culture. It's definitely
Yeah.
the curry.
The curry, yeah, that's all-
which is
yeah.
I mean, hey, it's all delicious. To
It's
me.
all delicious, yeah. So it's very interesting.